Hello, my name is Richard Browning, professor of animal science at Tennessee State University. For the 2020 Small Farm Expo, I'm going to discuss some things that beef cattle and meat goat managers may want to consider when assessing the status of their programs. Now, there are a number of reasons why individuals get into meat goat management and cattle management. And oftentimes, one of those reasons is to make some money. Therefore, profit becomes an objective. Now, if we're trying to make money with these animals, one of the things that we want to attempt to maintain is a low cost management protocol. If we can lower our management costs or expenses and still maintain an adequate level of animal health and productivity, that increases our chances of making a profit or turning a profit. Now, if we think of beef cattle traits, reproduction, growth, and carcass are all important. But if we assign economic value to these traits, reproduction is generally viewed as being of highest economic value. Therefore, reproduction is considered most influential in profitability. So, if we're looking at cow herd reproductive performance, it could be said that dollars are made or lost based on the level of reproductive performance. So reproductive management is critical to profitability. We want cows that are going to produce a calf every year in the production environment. So we want to match the cow to the environment. We don't want to make dramatic changes in the production environment to suit the cow. If we don't have a good match, we need to consider changing the type of cow that we're running. Now, this slide shows some reproductive and weight data for the TSU Dexter herd over 4 years, where we had a 77% weaning rate in the cow herd in our low to moderate input management scheme. These cows are weaning off a little over 300 pounds in calf weight, and the cows at weaning are weighing 725 pounds. Now, these are Dexter cows, which are small cows, and they are certainly smaller than most of your commercial cows that you'll find in your commercial herds. Bulls are also important. If we're going to get high levels of reproductive rates in our cow herd, we need to have bulls that are fertile. And the bulls are also important in the genetic change because we expect the bulls to drive whatever genetic changes we're seeking in our calves. So as we look at cows, potential bulls, replacement heifers, what have you, we want to look at animals for their structural soundness. How do they look? Do they have good conformation? We sometimes want to look at their ancestry, look at the genetic background. Are there any genetic defects or faults that we want to avoid? Are there any particular family lines or genetic lines that we want to include in our programs? And when available, performance records are also important. Do we have weight data? Do we have reproductive data? Do we have carcass data? Do we have maybe temperament information on these animals that helps us create a total picture when we start making culling and selection decisions? Now, in cattle, there's 50 to 100 different breeds and breed combinations that we can select from when we're starting to develop our beef cattle program. Again, we want to consider the production environment that these animals are these breeds are going to be utilized in, and the marketing objectives when selecting a breed. Some breeds work better for some marketing objectives than others. So we want to make sure that the breed matches what our marketing. Who are we selling these animals or this beef to, and get a breed that's going to meet the satisfaction of those customers. And don't overlook non-traditional breeds, / alternative breeds, rare breeds, heritage breeds, what have you. Again, we run Dexter cattle, which are small cattle, because we're interested in small acreage, non-traditional marketing opportunities. But there are other breeds that are out there. We have Galloway cattle, Highland cattle, Red Pole cattle that are out there. There are a number of alternative breeds. Wagyu is a non-traditional that's really getting a lot of interest. And a lot of these breeds have unique attributes that will be beneficial in our production systems. So we don't have to always go with the mainstream commodity breeds whenever we're selecting a breed for our program or for crossbreeding. And we do crossbreed, even with our Dexter cattle. Crossbreeding is important. It's something that can really benefit your program. We're crossing our Dexter cows with a heat-tolerant breed, a small heat-tolerant breed out of Africa called the Mashona. This is our Mashona, one of our Mashona bulls here. We're running 5 Mashona bulls right now in the breeding program. So crossbreeding is something that you may want to consider if you're producing market calves. Obviously, if you're producing registered C stock, crossbreeding is not an option for you. Do you have to own a cow herd to raise beef? Not necessarily. If I'm wanting to market steers, sell freezer beef, say I want to sell 5 calves a year, I don't need to own a small group of cows and a bull to produce those calves. I can just go out and buy those calves from somebody, eliminate all the risk associated with maintaining a bull and trying to get a high pregnancy rate, and just buy calves. That's a low risk venture right there. So that's something to think about. You do not have to own cows to sell beef and to raise beef cattle. Nutrition is certainly important. Our nutritional inputs are ones that we want to pay attention to. Water and minerals, low cost essentials. Animals need to have a source of clean, fresh water and loose minerals, trace minerals, as well as our macro minerals. They should be available at all times. We want to emphasize forages in our nutritional program. Primarily pasture. In some cases, we need to have hay available. There are many approaches when we start looking at grazing our pastures. There's a number of grazing systems that are out there. Whatever we do, we want to watch the cost of these approaches, because we still want to maintain low cost, and know your forages, forage types, forage quality. All this plays an important role in maintaining animal productivity. Concentrates are going to be costly. Sometimes they're necessary. So whenever you're feeding supplements, you want to really do some cost analysis to see, what can we feed without going overboard in terms of our input costs. If we can maintain good pasture and hay, we may not need concentrates all the time. There's been a couple of years where we didn't feed any concentrates all year because we had decent pasture and hay. That's not always the case, but that's what we're striving for. Health management is important. We want to have an annual vaccination plan. There are a number of protocols that are out there. Find one that works for your production system as well as your marketing strategies. Prevention improves profitability. Treating sick animals, trying to get them back to health, that's a costly endeavor. Apply parasite controls as needed, for internal and external parasites. For cattle, certainly external parasites could be an issue. If we get the right genetics, sometimes that goes a long way in controlling some of these external parasites. We want to properly store, utilize our medications. We're going to have, antibiotics on the farm. We're going to have vaccines on the farm. We're going to have dewormers on the farm. and we want to handle them properly and dispose of them properly, and dispose of them when they need to be disposed of, and pay attention to withdrawal periods. In other words, follow the labeled instructions for these medications, and have a good relationship with a veterinarian when you start developing and implementing your herd health program. We want to use frequent herd observations. That goes a long way in determining the nutritional status and the health status of our herd. So watch for changes in body condition and weight of these animals. That can indicate either a nutritional issue or a health issue. Fecal consistency, equally so. Hair coat, we want animals to have a really nice slick coat of hair this time of year, and for them to shed off their winter coats early in the spring. Look for odd behaviors, isolation, animals that just are not behaving in a normal manner. That could be a sign of illness, injury, some stress to the animal. And reproductive rates can also indicate an issue with nutrition or health. We could have some reproductive disease that's causing abortions or a lot of open, non-pregnant females. We need to pay those attention. But frequent, preferably daily herd checks will tell you a lot about what's going on with the herd. And a lot of these things that I've got listed here are equally important in our goat programs. Working facilities are important. If we have to work the animals for vaccinations or dewormings or to collect weights or tagging and what have you, we want to work a facility that is also going to allow for low stress management. Lanes, alleys, and holding pens need to be properly set up and allowed to actually hold animals. We don't need a facility that animals can be breaking out at will. A squeeze chute and a head catch. We got a squeeze chute here with the head catch. Restraining the animal is really helpful when we're working cattle. Our facility doesn't need to be expensive. It doesn't need to be fancy and elaborate, but it does need to function. It needs to do its job of holding, restraining the animals, keeping the animals safe, and the workers safe, during these periods of herd work. Information is also important. We sometimes overlook information as a resource, and we're talking a lot about resource management here. Information management is important. Internal and external information helps us in making sound decisions in our management programs. Internal information we've already talked about. Weight data from the herd, reproductive rates in the herd, body condition score, hair coat scoring. Anything internally to your herd is data that should be recorded. External information are things such as weather forecasts, marketing forecasts, animal health regulations. If we're getting ready to market animals, or we're bringing new animals into the program, or we're planning on weaning or doing preg checks, those things are important. Weather forecasts, short-term and long-term. Even with our our pasture management, those forecasts are important. And so we need to utilize that external information to help us in making management decisions. Okay. What about meat goats? They vary somewhat in terms of management needs than cattle. I like to say that you don't want to manage your goats the same way as you manage your cows, because the goats need browse. They need woody material because goats like to eat up. Goats are designed not only for grazing, but for eating, a lot of these woody vine type plant materials. And if you don't have this kind of material, you should seriously, reconsider whether you should get goats or not. Because if you're going to manage them on straight grass, you're looking for trouble, particularly in this part of the country. Like with cows, profit or loss is going to be determined by the reproductive rates in your doe herd, and we want to keep costs down. Again, be a low to moderate cost manager. Health management is important, nutritional management is important, genetic management is important in maintaining adequate levels of goat herd performance. Unlike with cattle, where you got 50 to 100 different breed and breed combinations, with meat goats in the United States, we only really have 5 breeds. These 5 are here: Boer, Kiko, Spanish, Myotonic, and Savannah. We can throw in some dairy goats. There are a couple of dairy goat breeds that make good contributions to meat goat production systems. Even with these few breeds that we have here, we still need to make sound decisions because each one of these breeds have strengths and weaknesses. Reproduction is key, and hardiness is key for meat goats. Hardiness meaning the ability to stay healthy and survive. A sick goat is not going to be a reproductively sound goat. They're not going to be productive. And so we need to get genetics that are going to convey hardiness in our herds. This graph shows some reproductive data for Boer, Kiko, and Spanish does. And we've consistently found that Kiko and Spanish does are better in terms of reproductive rates than our Boer goats in terms of kids weaned and weight weaned. And so we want to focus on these 2 breeds in our commercial meat goat herds. And we reserve the use of Boer goats as a sire if we're trying to produce market kids. The reason why the Boer goats are at a disadvantage in terms of reproductive performance compared to the other 2 is because they maintain higher levels of internal parasites. They're more susceptible to internal parasitism than the Kiko and the Spanish, and this leads to higher death rates and higher herd exit rates than these other 2. And so it's really important how we manage the genetics of our doe herd. It kind of goes back to matching the animal with the environment. Boer crossbreds are okay in the doe herd, in the commercial doe herd. We want to limit the amount of Boer genetics. Certainly, we don't want to go over 50% in our commercial does. But the lower the percentage of Boer goat genetics in our doe population, the better off we'll be. The economics are really telling. Over the course of several years of studying these breeds for doe performance, we've done some economic analyses. Again, if profit is an objective, these numbers need to be considered. These are our management costs for these breeds and the cash revenue. And we found that on an annual basis, our Kiko or Spanish does turn a profit, whereas our Boer goats show net losses every year. This is over 6 years, these particular numbers. So your genetic management on the maternal side is really important. A couple other things with regard to managing meat goats. Predator control is a must. Whether using livestock guardian dogs, donkeys, llamas, it's important that we control predators because we deal with coyotes and foxes, maybe bobcats, stray dogs. Sometimes we deal with hawks or buzzards in some herds, and so we need to maintain adequate predator control because predators can wipe out a goat herd just almost as fast as internal parasites can, especially during kidding season. If you have good livestock guardians out with your goats, you can sleep easy knowing that those kids are going to be safe. Shelter and fencing for goats requires a lot of attention. Fencing in particular, because goats, they're easy. They find weaknesses in your fencing system at a snap, and so you have to have good fencing if you can keep your goats in. There are a lot of fencing options that are out there. One thing you want to be aware of is, some of the fencing material that's out there can be hazardous to goats in terms of them getting their heads hung up, and that can pose a real management headache. And so that's something you want to keep in mind is when you're putting your fencing plans together. Shelter is also important for goats. Cattle need shelter primarily in the summertime to avoid heat stress. Goats need it also to get out of the rain because they do not like rain, and it's kind of like a comfort zone. Shelters are for goats. When they get stressed, they like to run to their shelters. And so, shelter and fencing needs, a good bit of planning for your goats. Consider byproduct feeds for goats. Just like with cattle, we want to rely primarily on forages, but sometimes you may need to supplement them. Thing about goat feed, it's expensive. And byproducts are often a lot cheaper. In the research herd at TSU, we feed whole cottonseed. That's the only thing we feed the does, when we're having to supplement, except during breeding season. And we also feed this to the cows. Since we're feeding it to the does, we also feed it to the cows. But you don't want to feed it to the bucks. You don't want to feed it to the bulls because it will cause infertility. So if you have bucks or bulls running out with your breeding herd, you will have to feed a commercial feed while the breeding season is ongoing, if you have to supplement at all. Know and develop your marketing plan before you start your enterprise and before you start each breeding season. Know who are you selling your animals to and how are you going to get them to the market, whether it's talking about calves, replacement heifers, wean kids, what have you. Know and develop your marketing program before you put those bulls out, before you put those bucks out. Because your marketing plan is going to often dictate what kind of genetics you're going to use, what breeds you're going to use in your breeding program. It's hard to after the fact, after these calves are weaned, now you're trying to find a place to market them. You don't want to get into that scenario. Keep good and consistent records. We've talked about performance records here, whether it's growth data, reproductive data, health data, observational records on body condition or hair coat. You want to keep good health records. Your records on vaccinations in terms of goats. Think about internal parasite treatments or foot rot treatments. Those are important. And then financials. You want to keep good financial records because if one of your objectives is to turn a profit, it's not enough that you generate a check on your sales. You know your revenue, but you don't know your net return. You don't know your profit. And so to know the profit, I need to know what my expenses are. So we need to keep records. So we need to keep performance records, health records, and financial records. And you can diversify. It's not an either or. I can run cattle or goats. You can run both of them. And there are some studies that have shown that if you have a cow herd, for instance, and you add a few goats, you can actually generate more revenue per acre because of the added marketing opportunities with those goats, as well as the goats can help with pasture management as well by clearing out some of those weeds that you would otherwise have to mow or put chemicals on. And so that's my talk. This is my contact information here. If you would just do an internet search using these terms, this website will pop up and you'll find some of the information posted there on our meat goat research program as well as on our Dexter cattle program. Feel free, if you are in the Middle Tennessee area and you want to stop by for a visit and tour the farm, just get in contact with me and we'll set up a time for you to come and visit. We can talk about our program and your program. With that, I'm going to close. I wish you all well in your cattle and meat goat enterprises. And if there's anything that we can do to help you out, feel free to reach out and ask. With that, I will close.